So let's get into the Seahawks game. It was terrible. I mentioned in my last episode that I started this radio show before the Bills series and before the Bills game. And when I was taking notes for that game, I think the headline that I wrote down initially was like, does the addition of Carlos Dunlap make this team a Super Bowl contender? And that was barely a month ago. And it feels like so long ago for that to happen. Obviously, the Bills loss was tough, but the Bills were a good team. The Rams loss was ugly. And then things just really have spiraled since then. Yeah, they got the win over the Eagles, but they didn't even look good there. And then this game against the Giants, this was the segment of the schedule where they had the Eagles, the Giants, the Jets, and Washington. And for those 4 games, it was like, okay, they're going to get 4 wins. They're going to be in a much better spot. They're going to be 11-3, and we're going to feel good going into those games against the Rams and the 49ers. And then to drop this one to a Giants team that was 4-7 heading into the game and didn't even have their starting quarterback. They were starting Colt McCoy. He looked okay, but he's a 34-year-old journeyman backup quarterback who shouldn't be beating really anybody in the NFL, but definitely should not be beating the Seattle Seahawks. No. There are so many reasons the Seahawks lost this game, but we got to start with Russ. I think we have to start talking about Russell Wilson. I've defended him on here a handful of times, said that a lot of the struggles we've seen over the last couple of weeks have not been his fault, and I stand by that in a lot of ways, but a lot of this game was kind of his fault. He didn't look good at all. It was one of the worst performances we've seen from him. He looked indecisive. His passes were sailing a lot of the time. Can you just talk about what you think might be going on with Russ at this point?
It's crazy because for the first 5, 6, 7 games of the season, he was the MVP frontrunner. Yeah. He was playing out of his mind. I think there's multiple factors going on. It's not all Russ. The O-line has kind of regressed a little bit. I don't think the play calling I don't think they've done a good job adjusting to kind of some of the teams taking away those deep plays, but a lot of it falls on Russ. I mean, he was fantastic, obviously, for the first 5 or 6 games of the season, and just has not been he has not been the same since. I think ever since really that first half of that first game against the Cardinals down in Arizona. They were just firing on all cylinders there. I think they had like 27 points, 370 total yards in that first half. I mean, it was probably the best offensive half of Seahawks football I've probably ever seen. I mean, they were just absolutely on fire. And Russell Wilson and the offense just have not really looked the same ever since. That was the game where he had those 3 interceptions. Prior to that, I think had gone 39 consecutive games without throwing multiple interceptions in a game, which is remarkable. And then he did it 3 times in the next 4 games. He had 3 interceptions against the Cardinals, and then he had 2 apiece against the Bills and the Rams. And so I think you've seen kind of a progression where he was playing out of his mind, and then he started throwing these interceptions. And I think he's kind of got into his head a little bit because it was so uncharacteristic, that he was kind of throwing these interceptions and turning the ball over, that I think during the next 2 games, so the Arizona game and then the Philadelphia game, I think he almost got in his head a little bit because those games he didn't turn the ball over, but like he still made some good plays, but like he just seemed very kind of conservative and risk averse, just not kind of his usual self. Like he seemed, it was a very kind of almost timid, kind of risk averse, kind of safe way of playing. But then Sunday was like just to the absolute extreme of that. Like I don't think I've ever seen him so timid and be so hesitant there. I mean, there were times where it looked like he was going to throw the ball and find it open, and you're kind of sitting there, you're kind of waiting, and then he would take a sack for like a 15-yard loss. And I have never seen him look that timid, that hesitant, and that kind of confused almost, not confident in what he's doing. He's usually so confident in throwing the deep ball or throwing whatever type of pass he's throwing, and he just looked almost lost out there. And it's crazy looking back at like how he looked at the start of the season, especially that Atlanta game where he was so quick, so decisive, just slinging the ball all over the field. And now he just looks almost lost. And so I think it's kind of been this kind of a progression where he started kind of turning the ball over. And I feel like he's almost kind of psyched himself out a little bit to where he doesn't want to turn the ball over so bad that he's almost afraid to kind of make some of those throws now.
Yeah, it's funny because I initially pushed back on that idea because Russ is so kind of robotic in the way that he thinks, and he has all these mental health coaches, and he like works so hard to not let things mentally impact him, to the point where I was like, nah, it's got to be more than that. And they're like you touched on, and we'll touch on a lot more. There is a little bit more to it than that with the play calling and with the pass protection and things like that. But it was pretty obvious watching this game that there's some competent stuff going on. And I would need to watch the all 22, which I don't know if I'll get to this week, to be honest. But unless New York's coverage was like elite, which it has not been this year or I mean, it would have to have been like Legion of Boom-esque for Russ to have to go to his checkdowns that quickly. And it makes me think that he was lacking confidence. And I remember, I believe it was the Rams game, and I'm struggling to remember which exact game it was, but he had that really horrific interception where he was like right at the line to gain.
The Rams game, yeah.
Yeah, and he threw that one across his body. Like, that was probably too confident, Russ there. And I'm okay with Russ making mistakes when he's too confident. And I think that we've now seen the counter to that. When he makes mistakes when he's not confident enough, it's a lot worse. That was a bad throw against the Rams. Don't get me wrong. He should not have made that throw. But sometimes that works. Or sometimes the defender will miss it. Like, something like that will happen when he's just throwing checkdowns. And the best case scenario is a 4-yard gain. The worst case scenario is that he overthrows the checkdown, which he did a handful of times. Those usually lead to picks because there's defenders there. I would much rather see arrogant Russ. and I know that some people were like, oh, he needs to not be as confident, or he needs to check it. And like, no, I would rather that than what we've seen lately, because I think you're absolutely right. He's made some mistakes, and some of the interceptions prior to this game that kind of led to this weren't his fault. Some of them were great plays by defenders. One of them bounced off Greg Olsen. Like, some of them aren't his fault, but I think it sure seems like when you kind of look at what we saw from him, again, either the New York Giants played the greatest defense in the secondary that they've ever played in their franchise history, leaving nobody open. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, who have never struggled to get open in their careers, all of a sudden couldn't get open against a Giants secondary, or Russ was just panicking. And his pass protection wasn't great. And that is kind of what I want to talk about next, because I think that was a factor in this game too. Obviously, the biggest thing, Brandon Shell was not participating. Cedric Obuhi was not participating. The two right tackles, they started Chad Wheeler, who hadn't played in the NFL, I believe, in 2 years. He started for the Giants his rookie season out of USC, but there's probably a reason he hasn't played the last few years. And I watched him. He got pushed back a lot, but he didn't give up a ton of sacks. He just, he was part of the reason that Russ was getting flushed out of the pocket rather early, but they were missing him. They had some other injuries throughout the line. It does seem like the pass protection has really faded in the last couple of weeks, and you got to imagine that that's a factor for us at this point.
It has. I dug up some numbers here. Pro Football Focus, their pass block grades. So for the first 4 out of the first 5 games, Seattle's pass block grades were above 70. Since then, they have not reached 70 since. And then also those first 8 games, only once were they below 60. Over the past 4 games, they've been below 63 out of the last 4 games.
Yikes.
And so I think that was kind of a story that didn't really get talked about enough. I think was Russell Wilson, for like the first time in his career, was actually getting like pretty good pass protection. So prior to this season, 5 out of the last 7 seasons, Seattle ranked 30th or worse in PFF's pass block rating. Obviously, the tape obviously showed that. I mean, Russell spent those years just running for his life. And so the first half of the season was really, I felt like the first time that in a long time, maybe ever, that I've ever seen Russell Wilson look like truly confident in that pocket, like not to the point where, because there were some times in recent years where the pressure was like so often that even when the pressure wasn't there, he was still kind of like looking around and kind of skittish and like, okay, where am I going to get hit this time, kind of thing. And so he just looked so confident and comfortable in the pocket early this season, especially that Atlanta game. He was like 31 of 35, slinging the ball all over the field, quick, decisive, in rhythm. And right now it's just the complete opposite. He's kind of gotten back to kind of that skittish Russ where, again, it's not totally his fault, but the offensive line play has regressed a little bit. Obviously, injuries have played a factor. They had to shuffle things around when Ethan Poshik was out. And then obviously now they're being down to their 3rd string center for most of the game, and then down to their 4th string center for the 4th quarter. And so the offensive line, the pass protection has faded off a little bit, and that's definitely been one of the factors, and I think probably something that was not talked about enough for Russ's success early on, and probably something that isn't being talked about enough for kind of some of the things that are going on right now.
Yeah, and I think it kind of coincides too with a change in how opposing defenses are attacking the Seahawks. Obviously, the Seahawks have built themselves as this team that was kind of going to pound the ball down your throat on the ground and then pass more often on third down, and they got very predictable the last couple of seasons. That's been the criticism of run pass being all they ever did, and that's kind of what bore out the whole let Russ cook movement. And then they did, and I think it really caught teams off guard because not only were the Seahawks passing way more, which teams knew if they ever did, they would be great at because Russell Wilson's exceptional. They were doing it more, and they had a good pass rush. So teams were like, oh, we can't figure out how to get to Russ, and he's got 2 elite receivers. He's got a good group of tight ends they're protecting. What the hell are we going to do? And that's what happened. And then everything kind of fell apart at once where the offensive line got a little bit more hurt. The offense itself got a little bit stale. Obviously, Chris Carson being hurt was a factor because the run game kind of got eliminated to the point where then they had to go to the pass. And then what we saw, Buffalo did this really well, and I think New York did it really well, was kind of these stunt rushes where they delayed a little bit. And there's one in particular, I don't remember who the rusher was, but it was Jordan Simmons playing left guard. Just watch the dude go straight past him and get to Russ easily. And when Russ is hesitating with the football, those gap rushes or those delay rushes are hyper effective because he's not getting rid of the ball quickly. And this is how opposing teams are really good against the Seahawks, is they just throw the ball in like 2.5 seconds or 1.5 seconds because they play this soft zone, which we could talk about later because we're not on the Seahawks defense yet. But with the Seahawks offense, like their passing plays take a while to develop. And then you realize that you can send these different pass rushes, and it was just a recipe for kind of all of these things mixing together. And then on top of all of that, you throw Russ having somewhere in the back of his head that he's going to throw an interception and worrying about that and hesitating just a little bit. Like, we didn't see how many 50-50 balls did we see thrown to DK Metcalf this game? Like, so few. DK Metcalf is a freak. You should be throwing him 50-50 balls unless he's against like Jalen Ramsey. And even then, they probably should have thrown him a few 50-50 balls against Jalen Ramsey. And against this defense, absolutely. And they didn't give him a shot to do that. And that's just upsetting. Like, that's something that they needed to get a chance to do. And part of it was Russ having to move, but part of it was him staying there too long. Like you said, he waited in there. The offensive line couldn't hold him for long enough, and he took sacks. And some of them are on him. Like, a lot of them are not on that offensive line too.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think defenses have kind of adjusted a little bit. One with the different blitzes, as you mentioned there, but also they've started really trying to take away those deep passes, and you saw it a lot yesterday where they were playing kind of those 2 high safeties. Minnesota also did a really good job in the first half of that game of really kind of trying to take away the deep ball. And the Seahawks just, a lot of times, they just don't do a good job of making those adjustments in game. Like, it was mind boggling. You're watching this game, and number one, they're playing, 2 deep safeties for a lot of the time. So those deep passes those long developing routes are not going to be there. And secondly, they were getting pressure on the quarterback. So that makes, as you mentioned, that makes it even tougher. It was just mind boggling why they didn't go to kind of a little bit more of a quick passing game and try and get kind of some of those shorter intermediate stuff. It seems, I mean, I'm not, obviously, I don't have a fraction of the football knowledge as Brian Schottenheimer, but from watching the game on my couch, it seemed like that was like a necessary adjustment that they should make, and they just never really seemed to do it. And also, again, part of that is Russell Wilson. Over his career, sometimes he's not done a great job sometimes at kind of taking those shorter, 4 or 5 yard gains when he needs to.
Yes. Yeah.
He loves throwing the ball deep. He loves the deep ball, and he's the best deep ball passer in the game. So you got to take those deep shots, but when they're not there, he has to take those shorter kind of underneath throws. And Schottenheimer, quite frankly, just needs to do a better job of getting or putting these receivers in position to make plays. And I just thought that it was very perplexing that there were not more kind of that they didn't go to more of a quick passing game here. And also, like, the lack of tight ends this season has been really perplexing. I went into this year thinking, like, man, they're gonna have this 2-headed monster with Greg Olsen and Will Disley. Olsen's obviously out right now, but I actually picked up Will Disley in 2 of my fantasy drafts at the start of the season in like the 14th round, because I thought, man, this could be like a steal. Like, I saw a big season coming for him, but they have not really utilized the tight end like I expected them to. And it seems, especially right now, as teams are trying to take away those deep passes, it seems like the perfect way to really kind of combat that is kind of the tight end, some of those kind of seam routes up the middle. So I think the Seahawks, I think Schottenheimer and Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson really need to kind of do some soul searching, and just in terms of kind of play calling, and really kind of make some adjustments, because other teams, the defenses are making these adjustments on the Seahawks, and they, for whatever reason, a lot of times they just seem to be really slow to make those adjustments themselves.